Chapter 18: Gas Exchange and Transport. In this chapter, we explore the essential processes that regulate respiration and ensure the efficient exchange and transport of gases in the body. We begin with gas exchange in the lungs and tissues, where oxygen moves from the alveoli into the bloodstream, while carbon dioxide is removed from the body through diffusion. At the tissue level, oxygen is delivered to cells for metabolism, and carbon dioxide enters the bloodstream as a byproduct of cellular respiration. Next, we examine gas transport in the blood, focusing on how oxygen and carbon dioxide are carried through the circulatory system. Most oxygen is bound to hemoglobin, while carbon dioxide is primarily transported in the form of bicarbonate ions. These mechanisms ensure that oxygen reaches tissues efficiently while carbon dioxide is safely removed. Finally, we discuss the regulation of ventilation, which is controlled by neural networks in the brainstem. Chemoreceptors continuously monitor oxygen, carbon dioxide, and pH levels, sending signals to adjust breathing as needed. This dynamic regulation ensures that ventilation meets the body's changing metabolic demands and maintains homeostasis. Through this chapter, we gain a deeper understanding of how the respiratory system functions to sustain life, providing vital oxygen to the body while efficiently removing carbon dioxide. The human body relies on a continuous exchange of gases to sustain life. It needs oxygen for cellular function and removes carbon dioxide to maintain balance. When these levels become imbalanced, serious issues can arise. Hypoxia occurs when there is too little oxygen in the body, which can lead to tissue damage and impaired function. On the other hand, hypercapnia happens when carbon dioxide levels become too high, disrupting the body's acid-base balance and potentially leading to serious health complications. To prevent these conditions, the body carefully regulates three important factors. It maintains oxygen levels to support cellular respiration, ensures that carbon dioxide does not accumulate to harmful levels, and balances pH to keep physiological processes running smoothly. By understanding these processes, we can appreciate the critical role of the respiratory system in maintaining homeostasis and supporting overall health. Gas exchange in the lungs and tissues is essential for delivering oxygen to the body and removing carbon dioxide. Breathing is the bulk movement of air in and out of the lungs, allowing gases to reach the exchange surfaces. However, the actual movement of individual gases occurs by diffusion, following partial pressure gradients until equilibrium is reached. The total pressure of a gas mixture is determined by the sum of the partial pressures of its individual gases. In the lungs, oxygen moves from areas of higher pressure to lower pressure. Oxygen in the alveolar air has a higher partial pressure than in the blood, so it diffuses into the bloodstream. Meanwhile, carbon dioxide follows the opposite pattern, moving from the blood into the alveolar air where its partial pressure is lower. A similar process occurs between the blood and the tissues. Oxygen leaves the bloodstream and enters the tissues where its partial pressure is lower, ensuring that cells receive the oxygen they need for metabolism. At the same time, carbon dioxide, which is produced by cellular respiration, diffuses from the tissues into the blood, where its partial pressure is lower. This exchange of gases between the lungs, blood, and tissues is a continuous process that maintains proper oxygenation and removes metabolic waste. Gases move throughout the body by diffusing down their concentration gradients. This process ensures that oxygen is delivered to the tissues while carbon dioxide is removed as a waste product. In dry air, the partial pressure of oxygen is about 160 millimeters of mercury, while the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is extremely low at only 0.25 millimeters of mercury. As air enters the lungs, gas exchange occurs between the alveoli and the blood. The partial pressure of oxygen in the alveoli is around 100 millimeters of mercury, while the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is 40 millimeters of mercury. Arterial blood carries oxygenated blood from the lungs to the tissues, maintaining an oxygen partial pressure of 100 millimeters of mercury and a carbon dioxide partial pressure of 40 millimeters of mercury. At the level of the cells, oxygen diffuses out of the blood and into the tissues, where its partial pressure is lower at around 40 millimeters of mercury. Meanwhile, carbon dioxide, produced as a byproduct of cellular metabolism, diffuses from the tissues into the blood, where its partial pressure is lower at approximately 46 millimeters of mercury. Venous blood, now carrying carbon dioxide and depleted of oxygen, returns to the lungs. The partial pressure of oxygen in venous blood drops below 40 millimeters of mercury, while the partial pressure of carbon dioxide rises to 46 millimeters of mercury. When this blood reaches the lungs, carbon dioxide diffuses out into the alveolar air, and oxygen diffuses back into the bloodstream, restoring normal levels before the cycle repeats. This continuous exchange of gases is essential for maintaining proper oxygen delivery and carbon dioxide removal, ensuring that cells receive the oxygen they need while keeping the blood's acid-base balance in check. Oxygen uptake in the lungs depends on the availability of oxygen in the inspired air and the efficiency of alveolar ventilation. When the partial pressure of oxygen in the alveoli is low, oxygen uptake into the blood is reduced, which can have serious physiological consequences. One factor that affects alveolar oxygen levels is the composition of inspired air. If the air contains abnormally low oxygen levels, the amount of oxygen available for gas exchange decreases. This is particularly evident at high altitudes, where the lower atmospheric pressure leads to a decrease in the partial pressure of oxygen, making it more difficult for the lungs to transfer oxygen into the bloodstream. Another critical factor is alveolar ventilation. If ventilation is inadequate, oxygen levels in the alveoli drop, leading to hypoventilation. Several conditions can contribute to this problem. Decreased lung compliance, as seen in diseases like asbestosis, makes it harder for the lungs to expand and fill with air. Increased airway resistance, a hallmark of conditions such as chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, limits airflow and reduces oxygen delivery. Additionally, central nervous system depression caused by alcohol poisoning or drug overdose can impair the respiratory centers in the brainstem, further suppressing ventilation and leading to dangerously low oxygen levels. Understanding these factors is essential for recognizing and managing conditions that compromise oxygen uptake and respiratory function. Gas exchange in the alveoli is a critical process that allows oxygen to enter the bloodstream and carbon dioxide to be expelled from the body. This exchange occurs across a thin barrier between the alveoli and the capillaries, ensuring efficient diffusion of gases. The alveolar walls are lined with a thin layer of surfactant, which reduces surface tension and helps keep the alveoli open. Beneath this, the alveolar epithelium, along with the fused basement membranes of the alveoli and capillaries, forms a minimal barrier to gas diffusion. Oxygen from the alveolar airspace moves across this barrier into the plasma and then into red blood cells, where it binds to hemoglobin for transport. Meanwhile, carbon dioxide follows the opposite path, diffusing from the plasma into the alveoli to be exhaled. The entire diffusion barrier is remarkably thin, measuring only between 0.1 and 1.5 micrometers. This thin structure is essential for efficient gas exchange, allowing oxygen and carbon dioxide to move quickly between the lungs and blood. Any condition that thickens this barrier, such as inflammation, fluid buildup, or scarring from diseases like pulmonary fibrosis can impair gas exchange, leading to reduced oxygen levels in the blood and increased difficulty in removing carbon dioxide. Understanding the factors that affect this diffusion barrier is crucial for recognizing and managing respiratory disorders. Gas exchange in the lungs can be significantly affected by various pathologies that lead to hypoxia, a condition in which the body does not receive enough oxygen. Several respiratory disorders can interfere with the normal diffusion of gases by altering surface area, barrier permeability, or diffusion distance. In a normal lung, gas exchange occurs efficiently because the alveolar structure provides a large surface area, and the diffusion barrier remains thin. As a result, oxygen and carbon dioxide levels are maintained within a healthy range. In emphysema, the destruction of alveoli reduces the available surface area for gas exchange. With fewer alveoli, less oxygen is absorbed into the bloodstream, leading to low oxygen levels. Fibrotic lung disease causes the alveolar membrane to thicken, which slows the diffusion of gases. Additionally, the loss of lung compliance makes ventilation more difficult, further contributing to reduced oxygen uptake. Pulmonary edema occurs when fluid accumulates in the interstitial space of the lungs. This increases the distance that gases must diffuse, making oxygen transfer less efficient. Although carbon dioxide is more soluble in water and may still diffuse effectively, oxygen levels in the blood can drop significantly. Asthma, on the other hand, is characterized by increased airway resistance due to bronchoconstriction. This obstruction reduces airflow into the alveoli, making it harder for oxygen to enter and for carbon dioxide to exit. As a result, oxygen levels in the blood decrease, causing hypoxia. Each of these conditions disrupts normal gas exchange, highlighting the importance of lung health in maintaining adequate oxygenation and respiratory function. Oxygen transport in the blood is a crucial process that ensures the body receives the oxygen it needs for metabolism. When oxygen enters the capillaries, it first dissolves in the plasma. However, this dissolved oxygen accounts for less than 2% of the total oxygen in the blood, making it insufficient to meet the body's demands. To effectively transport oxygen, the majority of it binds to hemoglobin, a protein found in red blood cells. Each hemoglobin molecule has 4 heme groups, allowing it to carry up to 4 oxygen molecules. When oxygen binds to hemoglobin, it forms oxyhemoglobin, a reversible reaction that allows oxygen to be released when needed. The binding and release of oxygen follow the law of mass action. In the lungs, where oxygen levels are high, the reaction shifts to the right, promoting the binding of oxygen to hemoglobin. This ensures that red blood cells become saturated with oxygen before they travel through the bloodstream. At the tissues, where oxygen levels are lower, the reaction shifts to the left, causing oxygen to be released from hemoglobin. This allows oxygen to diffuse into the tissues, where it is used for cellular respiration. Hemoglobin plays a vital role in ensuring that most of the body's oxygen is efficiently transported and delivered to the tissues that need it the most. Oxygen transport in the blood is a highly efficient process that ensures tissues receive the oxygen they need for cellular respiration. While a small fraction of oxygen dissolves directly in the plasma, accounting for less than 2% of the total oxygen in the blood, the vast majority, over 98%, is bound to hemoglobin inside red blood cells. Oxygen enters the bloodstream from the alveoli, where it diffuses across the thin capillary membrane. In red blood cells, oxygen binds to hemoglobin, forming oxyhemoglobin. This binding significantly enhances the blood's capacity to transport oxygen, ensuring that tissues receive an adequate supply. As arterial blood reaches the tissues, oxygen is released from hemoglobin and dissolves in the plasma. From there, it diffuses into the surrounding cells, where it is used for cellular respiration to produce energy. This continuous cycle allows the body to maintain efficient oxygen delivery while removing carbon dioxide as a waste product. Hemoglobin's ability to bind and release oxygen dynamically, based on the body's needs, is essential for maintaining proper oxygenation and supporting metabolic processes in every cell. Carbon dioxide transport in the blood is essential for maintaining acid-base balance and ensuring the efficient removal of metabolic waste. While a small portion of carbon dioxide dissolves directly in the plasma or binds to hemoglobin, the majority is transported in the form of bicarbonate ions. When carbon dioxide enters the bloodstream from the tissues, it reacts with water inside red blood cells, forming carbonic acid. This reaction is catalyzed by the enzyme carbonic anhydrase. Carbonic acid then quickly dissociates into hydrogen ions and bicarbonate ions. The bicarbonate ion, or HCO, is then transported in the plasma, where it plays a crucial role in buffering pH levels and preventing drastic changes in blood acidity. When blood reaches the lungs, the process is reversed. Bicarbonate ions recombine with hydrogen ions to form carbonic acid, which then breaks down into water and carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide is released from the blood into the alveoli, where it is exhaled. This continuous cycle of carbon dioxide transport and conversion is vital for maintaining homeostasis and ensuring that the body's pH remains within a healthy range. Carbon dioxide transport in the blood is a vital process that ensures the removal of metabolic waste while maintaining acid-base balance. Most of the carbon dioxide in the blood is converted into bicarbonate ions, allowing for efficient transport to the lungs, where it is eventually exhaled. As carbon dioxide is produced by cellular respiration, it diffuses out of cells and into the systemic capillaries. Only about 7% of the carbon dioxide remains dissolved in plasma. Nearly a quarter of it binds directly to hemoglobin, forming carbaminohemoglobin. However, the majority, around 70%, is converted into bicarbonate ions. Inside red blood cells, carbon dioxide reacts with water to form carbonic acid, a process catalyzed by the enzyme carbonic anhydrase. This carbonic acid quickly dissociates into hydrogen ions and bicarbonate ions. Hemoglobin helps buffer the hydrogen ions, while bicarbonate ions are transported into the plasma in exchange for chloride ions, a mechanism known as the chloride shift. As the blood reaches the lungs, the process is reversed. Carbon dioxide is released from hemoglobin, bicarbonate ions move back into red blood cells, and the carbonic acid reaction reverses. This regenerates carbon dioxide, which diffuses into the alveoli and is exhaled. This continuous cycle allows the body to efficiently transport and eliminate carbon dioxide, preventing harmful changes in blood pH while ensuring proper respiratory function. Breathing is controlled by specialized neurons in the medulla, which coordinate respiratory rhythms to ensure efficient oxygen intake and carbon dioxide removal. These neurons are organized into different groups, each with specific roles in regulating respiration. The dorsal respiratory group primarily controls the muscles of inspiration. It receives input from the ventral respiratory group and sends signals through the phrenic nerve to the diaphragm and the intercostal nerves to the intercostal muscles. This group also processes sensory input from central and peripheral chemoreceptors, which monitor carbon dioxide levels in the blood as well as oxygen levels and pH to a lesser extent. The Pontini respiratory group helps refine breathing patterns by sending output to the medulla, ensuring a smooth and coordinated respiratory rhythm. The ventral respiratory group consists of different regions responsible for more complex respiratory functions. One of its key areas, the pre-Boettinger complex, acts as a respiratory pacemaker, generating the rhythmic patterns that control breathing. Other regions of the ventral respiratory group regulate muscles involved in active expiration and deeper, more forceful inspiration, which is necessary during labored breathing. Additionally, this group controls muscles of the larynx, pharynx, and tongue, keeping the upper airways open during breathing. Together, these respiratory control centers in the medulla ensure that breathing remains efficient and adaptable to the body's changing oxygen demands. Breathing is a highly coordinated process controlled by neural networks in the brainstem. These networks integrate sensory information and generate rhythmic motor signals that regulate ventilation. At the core of this system is the medulla oblongata, where several key structures play a role in respiratory control. The dorsal respiratory group, located in the nucleus tractus solitarius, receives sensory input from cranial nerves 9 and 10. These inputs include signals from mechanoreceptors and chemoreceptors, which provide information about lung stretch and chemical changes such as carbon dioxide levels in the blood. The dorsal respiratory group then sends signals to the diaphragm, ensuring proper inspiration. The ventral respiratory group contains different regions responsible for more complex breathing patterns. The pre-Boettinger complex within the ventral respiratory group is a key respiratory pacemaker, generating the rhythmic activity that drives breathing. Other parts of the ventral respiratory group control the muscles involved in forced expiration and deeper, more labored inspiration. Additionally, this group regulates muscles in the larynx, pharynx, and tongue to keep the upper airways open during breathing. The pontini respiratory group, located in the pons, helps fine-tune the respiratory rhythm by sending signals to the medulla oblongata. This ensures smooth transitions between inhalation and exhalation, making breathing more efficient and adaptable to different physiological needs. Higher brain centers can also influence ventilation, allowing voluntary control over breathing patterns. Meanwhile, medullary chemoreceptors monitor carbon dioxide levels, adjusting breathing rate and depth to maintain stable blood pH and gas levels. Together, these neural networks in the brainstem ensure that ventilation remains automatic, efficient, and responsive to the body's changing demands. Ventilation is influenced by changes in carbon dioxide levels, oxygen levels, and pH, which are detected by specialized chemoreceptors located in the body and brain. These chemoreceptors play a crucial role in regulating breathing by ensuring that the body maintains proper gas exchange and acid-base balance. Peripheral chemoreceptors are found in the carotid bodies, which are located within the carotid arteries. These receptors are responsible for sensing changes in the partial pressure of oxygen and the partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the blood. When oxygen levels drop, pH decreases, or carbon dioxide levels rise, these chemoreceptors signal an increase in ventilation to restore balance. However, for oxygen to trigger a significant response, its levels must fall below 60 millimeters of mercury. Central chemoreceptors are located in the central nervous system, specifically on the ventral surface of the medulla oblongata. These receptors respond primarily to changes in the partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the cerebrospinal fluid. When arterial carbon dioxide levels increase, carbon dioxide diffuses into the cerebrospinal fluid, where it is converted into bicarbonate and hydrogen ions. This reaction leads to changes in pH, which stimulates the central chemoreceptors to adjust ventilation accordingly. By constantly monitoring blood gases and pH, these chemoreceptors ensure that breathing is regulated to meet the body's metabolic needs, preventing dangerous fluctuations in oxygen and carbon dioxide levels. The body's ability to regulate breathing relies on chemoreceptors that continuously monitor carbon dioxide, oxygen, and pH levels in the blood and cerebrospinal fluid. These chemoreceptors send signals to the respiratory control centers in the brainstem to adjust ventilation as needed. Central chemoreceptors, located in the medulla oblongata, primarily monitor carbon dioxide levels in the cerebrospinal fluid. When carbon dioxide in the blood increases, it diffuses across the blood-brain barrier into the cerebrospinal fluid. Here, carbon dioxide reacts with water to form carbonic acid, which then dissociates into hydrogen ions and bicarbonate. The rise in hydrogen ions lowers pH, stimulating the central chemoreceptors to signal the respiratory control center to increase ventilation. This response helps remove excess carbon dioxide from the body through exhalation. Peripheral chemoreceptors, located in the carotid and aortic bodies, monitor oxygen, carbon dioxide, and pH in the blood. When oxygen levels drop below 60 millimeters of mercury, carbon dioxide levels rise, or pH decreases. These chemoreceptors send signals through sensory neurons to the respiratory control centers. In response, the brainstem increases the rate and depth of breathing to restore proper gas exchange and maintain homeostasis. This system operates through negative feedback. As ventilation increases, carbon dioxide levels decrease, pH stabilizes, and oxygen levels improve, reducing the activation of chemoreceptors and restoring normal breathing patterns. By continuously adjusting ventilation in response to changing conditions, chemoreceptors ensure that the body maintains a stable internal environment, allowing cells to function optimally. In summary, we have explored the essential processes that regulate breathing and ensure efficient oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange in the body. First, gas exchange in the lungs and tissues occurs through diffusion, driven by partial pressure gradients. Oxygen moves from the alveoli into the bloodstream, while carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood into the alveoli to be exhaled. A similar process occurs at the tissues, where oxygen leaves the blood to support cellular respiration, and carbon dioxide enters the bloodstream as a metabolic waste product. Next, we examine gas transport in the blood, where most oxygen is carried by hemoglobin in red blood cells. Carbon dioxide is primarily transported as bicarbonate ions, allowing for efficient removal from the body. Hemoglobin plays a critical role in both oxygen delivery and carbon dioxide transport, ensuring that the body maintains proper gas balance. Finally, we discuss the regulation of ventilation, which is controlled by neural networks in the brainstem. Chemoreceptors monitor changes in oxygen, carbon dioxide, and pH levels, sending signals to the respiratory control centers to adjust breathing. This regulation ensures that ventilation adapts to the body's metabolic demands, maintaining homeostasis and supporting overall health. By understanding these key concepts, we gain insight into the mechanisms that sustain life and how the respiratory system maintains balance under various physiological conditions.